Today, we uncover the 10 oldest prisoners executed in the US, and I bet you haven't heard about them. Their crimes, their final moments, and the last words they left behind would definitely shock you. Welcome to my channel. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. That's the best thing you can do for me. Now, let's begin. I want the Irby family to know one thing. I regret what I did. I pray to God they get closure for having their father killed. Those were the last words of Carl Wayne Bunchen, spoken just before the lethal injection took his life. At 78 years old, he became the oldest person ever executed in Texas, a man who spent over 30 years on death row after taking the life of a police officer. It happened on June 27, 1990. Houston police officer James Irby had pulled over a vehicle for a routine traffic stop. Inside was Carl Wayne Bunchen, a man with a long criminal record and a reputation for violence. As Officer Irby approached the vehicle, Bunchen stepped out, pulled a gun, and shot him in the head at point-blank range. As the officer fell to the ground, Bunchen shot him again in the back, then turned his weapon toward bystanders, trying to steal a getaway car. He didn't get far. Within hours, police had him in custody. In 1991, he was sentenced to death, but he didn't go quietly. For the next 3 decades, he fought his sentence, filing appeal after appeal. He claimed he wasn't a danger anymore, that he had changed in prison. But the courts didn't buy it. His final execution date was set for April 21st, 2022. That evening, Bunchen was led into the execution chamber at the Huntsville unit. His last meal? Not specified. Texas had already banned special last meals for inmates. Before the injection began, he apologized to Officer Irby's family, saying he regretted his actions. But for the victim's widow, that meant nothing. She had waited over 30 years to see justice served. At 6:39 p.m., Carl Wayne Bunchen was gone. For decades, he claimed to have changed, but Texas never forgot what he did. My request is that my father forgive them. Thank you. Those were the final words of Big LeJob Stauffer II, spoken just moments before lethal injection ended his life. At 79 years old, he was the second oldest inmate executed in US history, a man who spent over 36 years on death row claiming he was innocent. But the evidence told a different story. In 1985, Stauffer walked into the home of Linda Reeves, a schoolteacher from Oklahoma. Her boyfriend, Doug Ivins, was also there. What happened next was brutal. Stauffer shot Linda twice in the head, killing her instantly. Then, he turned the gun on Doug, shooting him multiple times, but somehow, Doug survived. When police arrived, they found the gun still in Stauffer's car. The motive? Doug's ex-wife had been romantically involved with Stauffer, and prosecutors believed he was trying to eliminate both Doug and Linda to take advantage of a $2 million life insurance policy. In 1985, Stauffer was sentenced to death, but his execution was delayed for decades. His original conviction was overturned in 2003, but a second trial put him right back on death row. For years, he fought the system, arguing that lethal injection was inhumane. He insisted he was not the real killer and claimed he was being used as a test subject for executions. But in the end, none of that mattered. On December 9th, 2021, at the age of 79, he was led into the execution chamber at Oklahoma State Penitentiary. His last meal: a chicken sandwich, French fries, 2 cookies, mixed fruit, and a fruit drink. At 10:16 a.m., Big Stauffer was gone. He may have spent decades claiming innocence, but the courts never believed him. I have no final statement. Those were the last words, or lack of them, from Walter Leroy Moody Jr., the oldest person ever executed in US history. At 83 years old, he had spent nearly 3 decades fighting his sentence, filing appeal after appeal. But in the end, there was nothing left to say. Moody wasn't just any criminal. He was a domestic terrorist, a man who used bombs to settle grudges. In 1989, a package arrived at the home of federal judge Robert Vance in Mountain Brook, Alabama. When he opened it, the bomb inside exploded instantly, killing him and seriously injuring his wife. 2 days later, another bomb went off, this time in Georgia, taking the life of civil rights attorney Robert Robinson. Authorities later discovered 2 more bombs, one meant for the 11th Circuit Court and another sent to the NAACP. The FBI quickly traced the attacks back to Moody. His motive? Revenge. He had been convicted of a separate bombing years earlier and blamed the courts for ruining his life, but this time he had crossed the line. In 1991, he was sentenced to 7 life terms in federal court, but Alabama wanted more than that. In 1996, the state sentenced him to death for the murder of Judge Vance. For over 20 years, Moody fought his execution. He claimed he was wrongfully convicted, blaming the attacks on an elaborate conspiracy. But in 2018, at the age of 83, his time finally ran out. On April 19, 2018, Walter Leroy Moody Jr. was strapped to the gurney at Holman Correctional Facility. He was given the chance to speak one last time. He refused. At 8:42 p.m., the execution was complete. A man who had spent decades trying to manipulate the justice system became its oldest casualty. I'm sorry for what I did. I'm sorry for the world. I'm sorry for myself. And I'm sorry for the family. Those were the last words of John B. Nixon Sr., spoken as he lay strapped to the gurney. At 77 years old, he had the title no one wanted, the oldest person ever executed in Mississippi. A former mechanic and farmer, Nixon didn't fit the image of a cold-blooded killer, but he was. And what made his case even more chilling? He didn't kill out of rage, he did it for money. It was January 22nd, 1985, when Nixon, along with his son and 2 accomplices, stormed into the home of Virginia Tucker and her husband, Thomas. Nixon pulled out a .22 caliber pistol and pointed it straight at Virginia. Her husband begged for her life, offering money, anything to stop what was coming. But Nixon didn't care. He looked Thomas in the eye and said, "That's not what I'm after. The deal is already done." Then he pulled the trigger. Virginia died instantly. Her husband, shot twice, miraculously survived. And he made sure Nixon paid for what he did. Within a year, Nixon was sentenced to death. But that didn't mean much in Mississippi. His case dragged on for nearly 2 decades. He became an old man on death row, watching execution dates come and go. But in 2005, the system caught up with him. Mississippi was done waiting. On December 14, 2005, at Mississippi State Penitentiary, Nixon was led into the execution chamber. His last meal? A well-done T-bone steak, asparagus, baked potato, peach pie, vanilla ice cream, and sweet tea. As the execution began, he spoke his final apology. But Virginia's family wasn't convinced. To them, this wasn't about regret. It was about justice, long overdue. At 6:35 p.m., John B. Nixon Sr. was gone. He spent 19 years trying to escape this moment. But in the end, no matter how much time had passed, he couldn't outrun what he did. Hoka, hey, it's a good day to die. Thank you all. I love you all. That was the last thing Clarence Ray Allen said before the lethal injection took his life. He was 76 years old, blind, in a wheelchair, and barely holding on. But make no mistake, he was a cold-blooded killer who continued orchestrating murders even behind bars. In 1974, Allen set up a robbery at Fran's Market in Fresno, California. A store clerk was shot and killed. But the real horror came 6 years later. From his prison cell, Allen ordered the execution of 3 key witnesses, ensuring they would never testify against him. His hitman, Billy Ray Hamilton, followed through. He was sentenced to death in 1982, but like many death row inmates, he fought the system for over 2 decades. His lawyers claimed he was too old and sick to be executed, arguing that killing a blind, diabetic man in a wheelchair was cruel and unusual punishment. It didn't work. In 2006, Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger denied his clemency request. On January 17, 2006, Allen was served his last meal: buffalo steak, fried chicken, sugar-free pecan pie, and a bucket of ice cream. At 12:38 a.m., Clarence Ray Allen was gone. He spent more than 30 years on death row. He may have grown old behind bars, but justice didn't forget. It's all been said. Let it be done. Murray Hooper was 76 when he took his final breath on November 16, 2022. Executed in Arizona, Hooper spent 42 years on death row after committing a chilling crime that changed the lives of the Redmond family forever. In 1980, Hooper, along with two accomplices, Ralph McCollum and Gary Swanton, broke into the home of William Pat Redmond in Phoenix. They didn't just rob him, they killed him, his wife Marilyn, and her mother, Helen Phelps. The motive? Control over Redmond's printing business. Hooper was caught and sentenced to death in 1981. Despite multiple appeals over the years, he remained on death row, his legal team arguing for his release, but justice stood firm. On the day of his execution, Hooper was offered his last meal, KFC, macaroni and cheese, and a large Fanta soda. As the lethal injection was administered, he had nothing more to say. At 10:09 a.m., Murray Hooper was declared dead. "I'm sorry for what I did. I am truly sorry." Those were the final words of James Barney Hubbard, spoken moments before his execution on August 5, 2004. At 74 years old, Hubbard became the oldest person executed in Alabama in decades, but his path to death row started long before that day. In 1977, Hubbard brutally murdered Lillian Montgomery, a 62-year-old store owner who had shown him kindness after he was released from prison. She had even let him move into her home. But when Montgomery refused to give him money, Hubbard shot her 3 times, in the face, head, and shoulder. Initially, Hubbard tried to cover his tracks by claiming Montgomery had taken her own life. However, investigators quickly discovered the truth, leading to his arrest. He was sentenced to death in 1977. For almost 30 years, Hubbard remained on death row, arguing that his age and mental state made execution cruel and unusual. Despite his appeals, the courts moved forward with his sentence in 2004. On the day of his execution, Hubbard was offered his last meal: 2 boiled eggs, 4 slices of bacon, fried green tomatoes, pineapple slices, and a medium V8 juice. At 6:36 p.m., James Barney Hubbard was declared dead. Wayne Cobble faced his execution on February 28, 2019 at the age of 70. His journey to death row began with a brutal revenge killing, one that shook a family, a community, and left a haunting legacy. In 1989, Cobble, a man with a violent history, turned on his estranged wife's family in a rage that would forever define his life. After a bitter separation, he went to the home of Robert and Zelda Vischer, his wife's parents, along with their son, Bobby Vischer. Cobble opened fire on the family. Robert, Zelda, and Bobby were shot dead, a massacre born of jealousy and revenge. Cobble didn't just kill, they were gunned down in cold blood, and Cobble made sure he left no doubt about his intentions. His wife was the target of his wrath, and by murdering her family, he believed he could destroy the life she had rebuilt. He was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to death in 1990. For nearly 30 years, Cobble sat on death row, appealing his case, arguing for clemency, and even trying to use his advanced age as a defense. But the courts stood firm. On the day of his execution, Cobble was offered his last meal: a well-done T-bone steak, baked potato with sour cream, buttered asparagus, peach pie, and vanilla ice cream. Cobble's life ended with those simple words: "I love you, I'm sorry." At 6:22 p.m., Billy Wayne Cobble was declared dead. If you've made it this far, I just want to say thank you. I know these stories are tough, but they remind us that justice, no matter how long it takes, always finds its way. If you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and like this video. It really helps. And if you think someone else should hear these stories, don't forget to share. Your support means everything to me. I'll see you in the next video, with more stories that you won't forget.